Hello guys, and welcome back to the channel. On today's episode we're going to be changing a lower arm on an Audi A6 on the C7 chassis. Now the particular arm we're going to be changing is on the front lower rear arm, which is the most common arm to fail. Now the tools you're going to need are a small ratchet with a T25 Torx bit, a 10mm socket, a 21mm socket on a ratchet or a solid bar, doesn't matter either way, two 18mm spanners, and a fairly substantial hammer. Now you may notice in this video I use quite an undersized hammer as I recorded the video away from the workshop and some of the tools weren't quite correct. Now two more tools you might need are a 5mm Allen key and a 21mm spanner. Now you may not need these, it depends on if you run into trouble a bit later on, as you will see in the video where I explain where you use these tools. So now you're ready to start changing the arm. And as always, if you have any questions, just leave a comment down below. So once you've jacked the vehicle up and you've secured everything, the first thing you want to do is actually remove all of this plastic trim under here to allow you to get to the bolts on the back of the arm just down here. Now to take this off, you've got a small screw just at the top here, which is a T25 Torx, and then you've got various different 10mm plastic nuts like this located in different locations around them, and you've got one here as well. You need to take that off, pull this plastic piece forwards to take that off from behind it, and once you took all those off, this whole plastic trim should come out quite easily. Once you've removed all the nuts, this rear section should come out separately from the front section. This splits just here along this piece, so only this section will come out separately to the front piece. But yeah, once you've removed everything, including this nut at the back here, you pull this plastic piece forwards just so you can remove that off of there. There you go, that pulls off of there, and that frees that off, and you should be able to pull this whole trim out all in one go. Once you've removed all of that trim, you're going to then want to move down the bottom here at the back of the arm. You'll notice there's two 8mm bolts, one there, and there's a really hidden away 8mm nut underneath here. You can just see that right there. You need to remove those three, and then that little small section there will come out. You need to do this because you need access for this bolt to move out here. Underneath here as well though, you will need to bend a little more, a piece of it out of the way actually, just to give enough room to pull that bolt out. Okay, so once you've removed all the trim, next thing you want to go to do is down the bottom here, on the front of this arm, you'll notice this nut just here. It's a 21mm nut, and that's what you're going to want to remove next. If you have any trouble when you start undoing it and the whole lot starts turning with the ball joint, you actually have Allen key head in the end there, which you can put an Allen key in to stop the centerpiece turning when you're undoing the nut. But most cases you won't have that trouble. So once you've removed the nut, you're going to want to hit this stud to remove it out of the wheel hub. It can be very difficult sometimes, it depends how many years it's been in there. I mean, in the past I've had to really hit that hard with a sledgehammer to try and get that out, and it's took some persuading. If you do have some real big trouble getting this out at this point, you may need to heat this up with a heat gun and then give it a good whack, and it should free itself off. So once you've removed this arm and it's completely free from the wheel hub, you want to move to the back here now, and this is where you're going to need your two 18mm spanners. One on that side and one on the back here. Now preferably, if you have a ratchet spanner, it's going to make this job a hell of a lot easier. One like this, because you can get in there and you don't have to keep coming off and on the nut.
because as you can see it's quite restricted under there. So you want to put one spanner on the back, and then you can go ahead and start undoing the nut. Now just be careful doing this that you don't damage any of these pipes, of course. So once the nut's loosened, take it completely off. At this point it's going to be a bit of a tricky one where you're going to need to wiggle the arm a little bit while you're trying to push the bolt out, because it's going to be fairly tight in there. Once you've pushed this bolt back as far as it will go by wiggling the arm, obviously because wiggling the arm will make it a lot easier to push that bolt out, but once it hits the aluminium cowling you're going to need to remove a hidden bolt behind here, which I actually forgot about earlier on, and there's a second bolt also just behind here. So just remember that you got them two, that one and that one. Once you've removed that bolt, you just then want to push this aluminium cowling back, not too much to completely distort it where you can't repair it again afterwards, but just enough so you can then pull this bolt back a lot further. I mean, just bend it as far as you need it to get this bolt out enough to get the arm out. So I've just bent that back a little bit more, and actually now pull that out and wiggle it, and it actually comes completely out. So there you go. That arm should then be free. Just give it a wiggle, and there you go, dropped out. Now it's time to get your new arm and start installing it. Now with a lot of the new arms you get the nut already on here, but I don't advise using that, so remove that and I'll show you why in just a second. Take that off. If you look at the original bolt, it's actually got a very large washer on it, so I wouldn't recommend using the new nut. Reuse the old nut. So now we can move on to fitting the new arm. First of all, once you've obviously removed the nut, take this plastic cover off, and then you're going to want to try and wiggle the back end of the arm into position. I mean, this part can be really fiddly actually. You've got to try and line it up the best you can, and then get the bolt in there and try and wiggle it as you're getting the bolt through till it comes out the other side. There you go, just like that. And before you put any nut on there, you may want to just make sure that this side is actually back up and over in the correct position above the hole, like that, somewhere near. Just make sure it's sitting like that before you start putting the nuts back on that, because if you put that on you may realise you won't be able to get that above there, and then you have to undo the nut again to give it a bit of a wiggle. So now you can go ahead and put the nut back on and tighten this section back up at the back here with your two 18mm spanners. Once you've tightened that nut and bolt up at the back there, then comes the tricky part where you now need to try and locate that back into the hole. As you can see there, it doesn't line up. The best way to do this is if you grab this section here and push it away from you so it's pointing more towards that hole, and then you're going to want to push this whole hub in this direction as far back as you can. You may be able to get a bar, a long bar, tucked under here and gently across the front of this disc here, which will help you lever that in that direction more. And by doing that, that will help you line that hole up. You just got to wiggle it about, wiggle the hub, wiggle the arm until you can get that through there just enough sticking out the bottom to be able to get the nut back on. Now this is quite a tricky bit. Once you've got that through, as you can see there's enough thread sticking through there. You'll need to hold it because if you let go it will pop straight back out. But just get the nut on, just a couple of threads, just to hold that there, and then you can let go and relax. Now at this point you can actually start doing this nut back up. I mean, you can get quite lucky with the newer ones because the ball joint is quite stiff inside there. When you're doing the nut up, the centre core shouldn't spin. In a lot of cases it will pull it through nice and tight and you should be able to do it up. If not, that's where you're going to need a 5mm Allen key to hold in the centre there and get a 21mm spanner on this. So then you have to hold the centre with your Allen key with a 21mm spanner to tighten the nut up, which should, if you have to do it that way, look something like this. That on there. This is just for demonstration, obviously. You have to get your 21mm spanner on there and do the nut up while holding the centre core. That's how you have to do that if it spins, but in most cases on the new ones you do get quite lucky and it doesn't spin. So once that's all nice and tight underneath there and at the back there, you're then going to want to try your best to bend this aluminium cowling back into position the best you can. And once you've straightened that up, just remember to put your bolt and the nuts back into position, and then you can go ahead and put that aluminium cover back into position and bolt it on. When it comes to putting these two bolts back in, you just may have to wiggle everything about a little bit because they probably don't line up as well as they used to because you bent the piece underneath. But they will go back in if you persuade it enough. You may have to bend behind with your finger a little bit just to flex it a little bit till they all line up. And obviously remember to put your nut back on at the top there. So once you've put that cover back on, everything's tight, you can then go ahead and replace the wheel arch cover, which is actually the final part now. I mean, this section is going to be quite fiddly to get back in, because remember that you have to tuck it behind this piece, pull that off first, tuck it behind that onto there, then that back on, and obviously replace all your little nuts and bolts. A little tip when you're replacing this wheel arch cover, if you get it in almost into position and you slot behind here all the way up, all the way around to the top here, up to where that bolt goes, if you tuck it all behind, actually there's a bit sticking out there, tuck it all behind as it should, and that way we make it easier to line this bolt up and this bolt up here. Once you've fitted the trim back on and you've double checked that all the bolts are tight on everything, including obviously the bolts down here and the nuts under here, which are obviously the most important ones, but yeah, double check that your little nuts and bolts are tight under here. You just got to chuck your wheel back on the car and you're done.
Now I hope this video has helped you out in some way, and if it has, don't forget to click the like and subscribe and the bell notification, as this really helps the channel out and the algorithms on YouTube. Until next time guys, take care.